Hi, my name's Rachel Firth, and I am one of the co-creators of the Push campaign. I've been working in midwifery advocacy for about 10 years, and my mother-in-law is also a midwife. And so I've got both a professional and a personal love and connection to midwifery. So when it came to my own birth experience, I had a very clear picture in my head about the type of birth I was going to have. I'd seen enough movies, I'd heard enough stories about childbirth to build up a picture of what the big moment would look like. And I almost looked forward to the drama of it all. I assumed my water would break, probably when I was at home, before rushing to the hospital, where I would give birth, ideally in a birthing pool with a midwife and with my partner by my side. I saw the midwife lifting my baby onto my chest, and in that moment, it would be a whole different world. And as someone who had had many friends who had already had children and talked about the haze of those early days of motherhood, sleeping and feeding and falling more and more in love, I really just looked forward to what that experience was going to be. But when the baby still hadn't arrived 2 weeks past my due date, despite trying everything, I was called into the hospital to begin the induction process. So what that entailed was I moved into an induction ward where there were four other people, I think, and our birthing stories immediately became entwined with each other. We were just separated by blue curtains. And I felt really resentful from the start. I was resentful that the experiences of four complete strangers were now a feature in my own birth story. And when the woman and her family in the cubicle next to mine started having McDonald's for dinner, I was resentful that the smell of the McDonald's was a part of my birth experience. And when the woman opposite me went into labor in the middle of the night, I was resentful and uncomfortable that I had to listen to her moans. And I was willing the midwife to hurry up and move her into her own room. And I was thinking, I wonder how she's feeling about the fact that four strangers are listening to every part of her labor. With every shift change, there was a new midwife with their gloved arm at my bedside, ready to assess me or inject me. And I just felt more and more as the hours went on like a piece of meat. And I started really mourning the loss of the beautiful, empowering, natural experience that I thought I was going to have. By the time my daughter finally arrived at 4 o'clock on the 10th of August, with the Circle of Life playing on the speaker because my partner thought that would be funny, I was completely numb to the whole thing. The epidural and the 30 hours of being prodded and poked just made me feel completely detached from it all. And I remember the obstetrician and the midwife telling me how incredible I was, and me thinking, hardly. The fact that the obstetrician was there in the first place felt like it had been a bit of a failure. And then my little girl, Misha, I remember putting her to my breast and her taking it straight away and thinking, okay, at least that's gone right. But fast forward a few hours and she was still gnawing at my breast and so angry and hungry, and nothing was coming. And so I just was feeling more and more helpless. And a few hours after that, the midwife came in, and I remember her saying, "You're exhausted, the baby's exhausted, you both need some sleep. Let me give her a top of her formula." So again, I was like, okay, there's the second failure. And I watched as the midwife held my baby in her arms and gave her some formula. And again, it just felt like I'd failed again. And then cut to sort of 3 or 4 days later, and still the baby's very unsettled, lots of screaming, very little sleep. She was just constantly gnawing at me. And my mother-in-law, who, as I said, is also a midwife, came in and suggested that I try a dummy. She said she's struggling to soothe herself and she's using your boobs to do that. So, try a dummy. And I just saw it as another representation of my failure to soothe this child. On day 7 after the birth, I was sitting on the floor of the shower in my in-laws' spare room with my arms wrapped around my legs and my forehead on my knees, just exhausted from this first week of motherhood and kind of coming to the realization that I didn't like it. Uh, I just remember crying at that realization and mourning the experience that I hadn't had, and just really devastated for myself and for my daughter for everything that it wasn't. I thought I would be such a natural at it, and I just wasn't. So I let myself wallow in that for a while with the water pounding on my head as I cried. And I could feel myself starting to let go, feeling better just from the process of crying. And I began to unpack the feelings of failure and questioning where that had all even come from. Like, what was I trying to prove and who was I trying to prove it to? Because none of my friends and family had ever given any indication of judgment. And uh, so it really was coming from myself. And in that moment on the floor of the shower, I started to realize that I needed to give up on this picture of what I had hoped for and start figuring out how to make this reality work, because you can't go back. Right? The baby was here, I was a mother, and so I needed to start building a new plan to move forward and I guess survive motherhood. And given that it felt so much better just sitting on the floor in the shower and crying, I thought, well, this is a start. At least I know that when it does get really hard, I can just get in a shower and give myself a minute and just cry. And that's what I did many, many times over those first years of motherhood, because it is hard. Giving birth is hard. And when I look back at that experience, I know that every step of the way, it was midwives, both in the hospital setting and in my own personal setting, that understood that. Midwives are essential to women who are going through this experience. And yet, so often women are deprived of a midwife, and we need to change that. And that's why I continue in my advocacy for midwifery. And it's why we created the Push campaign, because women and families need to understand that midwifery is a women's rights issue. And we will continue to do everything that we can to advance this profession and ensure that midwives everywhere are uplifted, respected, and funded. Thank you.